They told me we were going to lunch and left me at a shelter, but the shelter director recognized me from the Forbes list. My name is Corin Vale, and the day my own children left me at a homeless shelter, dressed in my best suit, telling me we were going to lunch, was the day I stopped being their father. Not because I stopped loving them, but because that love had been turned into something unrecognizable, twisted into guilt, obligation, and control. They thought I wouldn't remember who I used to be. They thought the world had forgotten too. But the director of that shelter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. Vale, from the Forbes list?" That's when I realized the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. If this story ever makes you think twice about trust or forgiveness, then don't forget to share it. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too. My name is Corin Vale. I still remember that morning. The light slanting across the dining table, pale and soft, the way it used to when Elise was still alive. The house felt too large, too quiet. I had dressed carefully. Navy blazer, polished shoes, the old silver watch Elise gave me on our 25th anniversary. I thought I was going to lunch with my children. I thought it was a gesture of love, or at least respect. I didn't know it was a farewell disguised as kindness. They arrived late, Mara and Devin. My daughter, ever so composed, her voice smooth like she'd practiced what she wanted to say. My son, quieter than usual, eyes fixed on the floor as if guilt had weight. "Dad," Mara said, smiling too tightly, "we thought we'd take you out today. You've been cooped up too long. You need some air." Her words sounded sweet, but something about her tone, something practiced, hollow, unsettled me. Still, I wanted to believe her, so I locked the house, adjusted my jacket, and followed them to the car. The ride was silent, except for the soft hum of the city. I watched familiar streets pass by, landmarks I used to own. The glass tower with my company's name still faintly etched on the corner. The art gallery Elise had loved. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Devin kept glancing at his sister. Once I caught his reflection in the rear-view mirror. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching. I thought maybe they were nervous because they wanted to tell me something important. Maybe Mara was finally getting married, or Devin had forgiven me for selling the company after their mother's death. The thought warmed me. I wanted to believe we were still a family. We stopped at a small cafe I didn't recognize. The sign was faded, the curtains drawn halfway. "Just a quick stop," Mara said, her voice suddenly cheerful. "We'll grab something to go." They got out first. I remember the air, dry and sharp with dust, the faint sound of traffic fading behind me. When I turned to follow them, I realized they weren't walking toward the cafe at all. They were walking toward a brick building just behind it. The sign above the door read, "Haven Outreach Center," a shelter. For a moment I didn't understand. I thought maybe they were volunteering. But then Mara opened her purse, took out a folder, and handed it to a man standing near the entrance. She gestured toward me. He nodded slowly, glancing at me like someone inspecting a broken thing. "Wait," I called, stepping out of the car. "What is this?" Mara turned, her smile trembling just enough for me to see the lie underneath. "Dad," she said softly, "you need help. You can't stay alone in that house anymore. It's for your own good." Her words struck like cold water. I looked at Devin. His eyes darted away. "Mara," I said, trying to laugh, though my throat was tight. "You think I belong here? This is a shelter. It's temporary," she replied. "Just until we sort some things out. You'll be comfortable, I promise. They'll take care of you." The man by the door, tall, kind eyes, grey beard, stepped forward gently, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Mr. Vale," he said quietly, "please come inside. Let's talk," but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. My own children, the ones Elise and I had raised, the ones we gave everything to, were standing there, waiting for me to accept this humiliation like a gift. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. The company was gone, the estate tied in probate, and the last remaining asset, the house, was in my name. "You think I'm senile? That I don't know what you're doing?" Mara's voice cracked, just slightly. "Dad, please, don't make this harder." That's when I saw it. The car door still open, the engine still running. They weren't planning to come inside. "Mara," I whispered, my voice hollow. "You're not staying," she said nothing. Devin's eyes were wet, but he didn't meet mine. He climbed into the car. Mara followed. I stepped toward them, my hand outstretched, but the man, the shelter director, gently touched my shoulder. "Sir," he murmured, "let's not do this in the street." The car door shut, tires crunched against the gravel. I watched as the vehicle pulled away, the reflection of their faces shrinking in the window until it was gone. The wind stung my eyes, or maybe it was something else. I stood there in my best suit, holding nothing but the silence they left behind. The man by the door spoke again, softly. "Come inside, Mr. Vale." I turned to him. "You know my name?" He nodded, smiling faintly, though his eyes were full of something like disbelief. "Of course I do," he said. "Corin Vale. You used to be on the Forbes list." For a moment, everything stopped. The world tilted, humiliation and recognition colliding in one sharp breath. My children had left me at a shelter, but the stranger before me knew exactly who I was. That was the moment I realized. I might have lost everything, but the world hadn't forgotten me yet. And maybe that was my mistake to begin with. The shelter door creaked open with the slow reluctance of something that had seen too many stories like mine. The man, Elias, as I would later learn, gestured me inside with a quiet patience. I stepped over the threshold, the sound of my polished shoes echoing too loudly against the scuffed linoleum floor. The air inside carried a mixture of detergent, dust, and faint despair, the kind of scent that clings to places where hope has been negotiated too many times. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the narrow hallway lined with bulletin boards and faded motivational posters. "Second chances start here." The words felt cruelly ironic. My hands trembled slightly, though not from age, from disbelief. Elias spoke softly beside me. "We've got a quiet room for intake. You can sit for a bit." I didn't answer. I was still watching the door, the same one that had just shut behind me. I could almost hear the faint hum of my children's car fading into the distance. I wanted to chase it, to pound on that door and scream that this was wrong. But I didn't. Pride is a strange thing. It doesn't vanish with wealth. It just finds new shapes to hide in. Elias led me to a small office, the kind furnished with kindness on a budget. Mismatched chairs, a flickering desk lamp, and a cracked photo frame of someone's family smiling in front of a lake. He handed me a cup of water. I stared at it as if the reflection might explain something. "They said you might be having trouble," he said cautiously, sitting across from me. "Memory issues, maybe some confusion." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. The same line Mara had used when convincing me to step back from the company board. "It's for your peace of mind, Dad." I had believed her then too. "My memory is fine," I said quietly. "I remember every lie they've ever told me." He didn't flinch, just nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes families panic. They do what they think is best even if it isn't." "They call betrayal protection now?" I asked. Elias looked at me carefully. "No," he said, "but they call it love sometimes. That's worse." Something in his tone made me stop. He spoke like a man who had seen the pattern too many times. People abandoned, not because they were useless, but because they were inconvenient reminders of who others used to be. He asked me a few more questions. Age, medical conditions, next of kin. When I said none, my voice cracked a little. I hated that it did. He didn't press. He just nodded and wrote something in a small notebook. He gave me a thin blanket, a folded set of clothes, and a key tagged with the number 17. "There's a bunk in the back hall," he said. "It's quiet there. I'll check on you in a bit." The room was small, 2 beds, a window that didn't quite shut, and a fluorescent light that hummed endlessly. On the opposite bunk, an older man snored softly, one arm draped over his chest like he was guarding something invisible. I set the blanket down, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor until my eyes blurred. It wasn't the poverty that stung. It was the silence, the absence of voices that once filled my life. Elise's soft laugh, Mara's quick wit, Devin's quiet loyalty. I had built an empire so they would never need to beg or struggle. And now, here I was, counting the cracks in a shelter wall. Later that night, when the lights dimmed, I heard someone playing a guitar softly in the hallway, a tune full of melancholy, unfinished chords that wavered in and out of key. It made something tighten in my chest. I thought about the last time I'd seen my wife. She had been sitting on the porch swing, the evening light turning her hair into gold. "You're teaching them too much about power," she had told me. "Not enough about mercy." I'd laughed, too sure of myself to listen. "They'll understand when they're older," I said. Now I realized she had been right. They had understood power perfectly. Mercy, not at all. Around midnight, I got up and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, a single streetlight casting long shadows across the pavement. My reflection stared back. Older, yes, but still the same man who once built towers of glass and steel. And yet behind those eyes something new was beginning to stir. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Something sharper. The part of me that remembered every boardroom, every negotiation, every silent betrayal that had once made me rich. If my children thought I was done, they had mistaken silence for surrender. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. I closed the window, turned off the light, and lay back down. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would begin again, not as their father, but as the man they'd forgotten they created. Morning crept into the room like a reluctant guest, pale and cold through the grimy window. I'd barely slept. My mind was replaying everything, from Mara's trembling smile to the sound of that car door shutting. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't touch the body, only the soul. That's where I was, hollowed out but burning quietly inside. Elias knocked softly before entering. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee. "I figured you'd be up," he said, handing me one. It was bitter, too strong, but grounding. I nodded my thanks. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. "I looked you up," he said finally, "to make sure I wasn't mistaken. You really are that Corin Vale." I said nothing. My name sounded foreign in his mouth, like it belonged to someone else. "I remember reading about you," he continued. "Vale Industries. Renewable tech, right? You were the guy who turned steel and sunlight into money." I gave a faint, humorless smile. That's one way to put it. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. "I don't mean to pry. It's just, people don't end up here by accident. Especially not men who used to own half the skyline." I looked past him, toward the window where light broke in fractured lines through the dust. "You'd be surprised how quickly people forget what you built when they think they can take it." He didn't argue. That was something I appreciated about him. No pity, no false comfort. Just presence, the kind that didn't need to fill silence with noise. After a moment, he asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I should have said no. I should have kept my pride intact. But something in his voice, calm, steady, cracked the wall I'd been building around myself. So I told him, not everything, not yet, but enough, about Elise's death 3 years ago, the aneurysm that stole her mid-sentence, the way grief had turned my home into a museum of unfinished conversations, about Mara and Devon stepping in, insisting they'd handle everything because I was too lost in sorrow, about how, little by little, they'd convinced me to sign over control, the company, the accounts, the estate, each step wrapped in the language of care. By the time I realized what I'd done, they owned everything but my name. When I finished, Elias was quiet for a long while. "I've seen a lot of betrayal," he said softly, "but it's rare when it comes dressed as love." His words hit something deep in me. I thought of Elise again, her warnings, her intuition. She'd seen it coming, and I dismissed it because I couldn't imagine my own blood turning cold. "Tell me something," I said. "When did kindness start meaning control?" Elias smiled sadly. "Around the time people forgot that love without respect isn't love at all." He stood, patting my shoulder gently. "Listen, Mr. Vale, you don't belong in this place, not in the way others do. But maybe you were meant to be here right now, long enough to remember what you've lost and what you still have." "What I still have," I echoed. "They took everything." He shook his head. "No, they only took what you gave them. That's different." His words lingered after he left. I turned them over in my mind like a coin between my fingers. Later that afternoon, I walked the hallways, the faded walls, the distant hum of conversation, the quiet dignity of men and women who had lost much more than I had. Some greeted me with tired smiles. Others avoided eye contact, retreating into their small worlds of survival. I realized then how much I had lived above people like this, in towers of glass that separated me from the cost of my own ambition. And yet, here, stripped of everything, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Truth. Not comfort, not safety, just raw, undeniable truth. That evening, I found Elias again in his office. He was sorting donation forms, his glasses low on his nose. I hesitated in the doorway before saying, "You were right. They didn't take everything." He looked up. "Oh? I still have my name," I said slowly. "And I think, I'd like to see what it's still worth." For the first time since I'd arrived, he smiled. A real one, small but alive. "Now that," he said, "sounds like the beginning of something. I didn't know then what it would become, whether it would be redemption or ruin. But in that dim office, with the smell of old paper and coffee in the air, I made a silent vow. They had buried me in shame. I would rise in silence, not for revenge, not yet, but for truth. And truth, once it wakes, it does not go back to sleep. There are nights when memory doesn't come as images, it comes as sounds. The tick of a clock in a boardroom, the soft slide of a contract across polished glass. The laughter of people who used to call you sir before they learned your signature could make them rich. That's how it began for me again, inside that small shelter room. Ghosts whispering in a language made of echoes. It was Elias who left the old newspaper on my bunk one morning. Folded neatly, a faint crease down the center. I didn't ask where he found it, though I had a feeling he knew exactly what he was doing. On the second page was a small article about Vale Industries merging with another firm. A new era of leadership, it said. Under the headline was a photo, Mara and Devin standing together, smiling. My company, my legacy, and my children, shaking hands with men I once refused to do business with because I knew what they were. I read the article twice. My hand didn't shake, but something inside me did. It was the realization that they weren't just trying to erase me. They were trying to rewrite the story, the one Elise and I built from nothing. That day, I couldn't stay inside. I needed air, space to breathe through the weight pressing against my chest. I walked the city for hours, following the familiar routes of my past life, the streets that used to hum with my purpose. The world hadn't changed much, but I had. I walked past my old building, the glass tower now flying a different banner. My name was gone from the entrance, only faint shadows of the lettering remained, like scars etched into the steel. I stood there for a long while, watching the reflections move across the windows, the same sky, the same light, but everything else unrecognizable. It wasn't anger I felt, it was mourning, the death of something invisible. When I returned to the shelter that evening, Elias was in his office again, writing something in that worn notebook of his. I didn't knock. I just walked in, laid the paper on his desk and said, "They sold it." He looked at the headline, then up at me. "And what do you want to do about it?" The question startled me. Everyone else I'd known, family, friends, colleagues, would have said, "Why don't you let it go?" Or "It's too late now." But Elias didn't flinch. He just asked what I wanted. "I want to understand," I said. "I want to know how something I built from my bones became theirs." He nodded slowly. "Then start where it began to break." That night I did. I sat by the window, watching the rain drag shadows down the glass, and I started piecing it together. The memories came in fragments, the first cracks in the company, the quiet shifts in loyalty. I remembered the meetings where Mara sat beside me, taking notes with that intense, calculating focus that used to make me proud. I remembered Devin, who'd always hated the numbers, but loved the power they represented. And I remembered the day Elise had tried to warn me. It was just a few months before she died. We'd been in the garden late evening when she said, "You've built everything but distance between us, between them and who they used to be." I'd dismissed it as grief talking, her fear that success would hollow them out. Now I could see it clearly. She wasn't afraid of losing wealth. She was afraid of losing soul. In the days that followed, I began writing again. Notes, reflections, fragments of memory. I borrowed an old typewriter from the shelter's supply room, its keys stiff, its ribbon faint, and began to document everything I could remember. Contracts, board decisions, legal transfers. Each sound of the typewriter felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, Elias noticed. One evening, he brought me a fresh stack of paper. "You're building something," he said, "but make sure you know what it's for." "I do," I told him. "It's not revenge. Not yet." He smiled as if he didn't quite believe me. "You know, Mr. Vale," he said, "when people take from you, they think they've won. But the real loss comes when you forget who you are in the process. Don't give them that." His words followed me for days. I realized he was right. Mara and Devin had stolen my fortune. Yes, but what they wanted most was for me to accept the role they'd written. The broken old man tucked quietly away. Forgotten. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. That night, I dreamed of Elise. She was standing in the boardroom, the one that no longer bore my name, her hands resting on the table, eyes full of that steady light she always had when she wanted me to listen. "Corin," she said, "don't destroy them. Show them what they destroyed. When I woke, the rain had stopped. Dawn was a thin line of gold over the horizon, and in that fragile light I made a promise, not just to myself, but to her memory. I would reclaim what was mine, but not with fury, with truth. And truth, once exposed, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. The morning began like any other. The low hum of the shelter's heater, the smell of instant coffee, the faint shuffle of tired feet across tile. But that morning carried something different, a strange stillness in the air. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to find what I didn't yet know I was looking for. I had offered to help Elias sort through the storage room. Old donations, paperwork, boxes of forgotten things. He smiled when I asked. "Be my guest," he said. "There's history buried in there. Maybe you'll find something worth keeping." The room was small and smelled of dust and paper. Faded files lined the walls, stacked high and crooked. I worked in silence, sorting what could be saved from what was beyond repair. Somewhere between a box of medical forms and a drawer of broken pens, I found it. A small wooden case, old but familiar. My breath caught. I knew that wood grain, the slight chip on the corner. It was Elise's. I knelt and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax. The old kind she used when she wanted something to feel personal. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The handwriting was hers, slanted, elegant, with that tiny curl she added to her lowercase y's. "Corin, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I can only pray that the world has been kind to you, but I fear it hasn't. You never believed me when I told you that love and ambition don't speak the same language for long. You wanted to build something unbreakable, but in doing so, you taught our children that strength means control. That love is something you can own. Promise me one thing. When they forget who you are, don't forget who you were. Don't become smaller because they made you feel disposable. Remember that the man I loved was never made of money, but of meaning. You once told me the secret of power is patience, so be patient now. The truth will come home when it's ready." Elise, I read it twice, then a third time. Each word felt like both a wound and a healing. The tears came slowly, not from sorrow, but from recognition. I could hear her voice again, soft and knowing, cutting through years of silence. I sat there for a long while, the letter trembling in my hand. The light through the narrow window caught the paper, turning her words into something almost sacred. I realized this was more than comfort. It was a map, a message left for the version of me who had lost everything. When Elias found me later, I was still sitting on the floor. He looked at the letter but didn't ask. He just waited. "It's from my wife," I said finally, my voice rough. "She knew, all of it, even this." He nodded, his gaze soft. "Then maybe you were meant to find it now, not before." "I think she left it here," I murmured. "She used to volunteer at shelters years ago. Maybe she brought this one donations, maybe she—" I stopped, overwhelmed by the symmetry of it all. Elise had always believed in timing. Elias crouched beside me. "What does it say?" "That I shouldn't forget who I am," I said. Then, quieter, "that the truth will come home when it's ready." He smiled faintly. "She sounds like she knew you better than you knew yourself." She did. I looked down at the letter again, tracing the edges. For the first time since that day in the parking lot, I felt something break open inside me. Not pain, not rage, but clarity. I'd been reacting, surviving. Now I was remembering. That evening, I took the letter back to my room and placed it inside the drawer beside my bunk. I couldn't explain it, but I needed it there. A quiet heartbeat in the dark. Then I began writing again. This time not as records or revenge, but as testimony. Elise's words had reminded me that truth wasn't just about exposing others. It was about reclaiming yourself. By midnight, I had drafted 10 pages. A timeline of transfers, names of shell corporations, the legal blind spots my children thought I was too broken to remember. Years of habit and precision came flooding back. Every decision and signature still carved in my memory. They had counted on my silence. They had mistaken grief for weakness. When I finished, I folded the pages neatly and slipped them into an envelope. On the front, I wrote a name I hadn't said in years, Mira Chaston. She had once been my legal advisor, brilliant and unflinching, someone Elise had trusted before she retired abroad. If anyone could help me turn memory into proof, it was her. I looked at Elise's letter one last time before closing the drawer. Her words echoed like prayer and warning both. Be patient now. The truth will come home when it's ready. I whispered into the quiet. It's ready, Elise. I am too. And somewhere deep in that shelter, between the hum of the lights and the slow breathing of sleeping souls, I felt something shift, the beginning of a return. The following morning carried the smell of rain, sharp, metallic, and heavy with memory. The kind of rain that doesn't fall but lingers, pressing against the windows, waiting to be let in. I rose before dawn, the letter from Elise folded neatly in my pocket, and the envelope for Mira tucked beneath my coat. Today, I would step out of the shelter, not as a man displaced, but as a man returning. Elias caught me at the door. He didn't ask where I was going, but his eyes said everything. You'll come back? He asked. If I can, I said. But I think it's time I stop hiding behind the walls that saved me. He gave a small nod, the kind that carries both blessing and farewell. Then walk carefully, Corin. Truth has sharp edges. Outside, the streets were washed pale with rain. I walked with no umbrella, letting the water soak through my coat, my shoes, my hair, as if the city itself was baptizing me back into existence. Each corner I turned carried fragments of the past. The bookstore Elise loved, now boarded up. The cafe where I signed my first major deal, now a boutique with a name I didn't recognize. The world had moved on without me, but I wasn't here to reclaim my place in it. I was here to finish what they thought I'd forgotten. I reached the post office just as the sun began to rise, pale and reluctant. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed like old machinery. I handed the envelope to the clerk. Overseas priority, I said. To Portugal. He looked at me, then at the name written in careful black ink. Mira Chaston. That'll be 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said, stamping it. I nodded. 2 weeks was fine. I had waited years. When I stepped back outside, something inside me shifted. Not relief, not victory, but inevitability. I knew that once that envelope left my hands, there was no turning back. I wasn't the ghost they had left behind anymore. I was a witness with purpose. For the next several days, I returned to the shelter, but spent my nights walking the city. Every alley, every flickering streetlight carried echoes of the man I had been. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in a shop window and almost not recognize him. Thinner, yes, but steadier. The haunted look had softened into something else. Resolve. 2 weeks later, the reply came. It was a letter, handwritten in ink that bled slightly at the edges, unmistakably Mira's style. The envelope was thick, official. Inside was a short note and a stack of documents that felt heavier than paper should. Corin, I received your materials. I've reviewed the timeline, and you were right. Your children did more than disinherit you. They funneled the estate through a series of offshore trusts that appear legitimate only on the surface. I can confirm that at least 2 of those entities are still active, both tied back to the same central fund you originally built. If you wish to proceed, I can help you reopen your rights of claim, quietly. But understand this, if you move forward, you will have to face them and the world that helped them erase you. I'll need your answer soon. Time is no longer your ally. Mira must have read it 20 times. Every word felt like the reawakening of a part of me that had slept too long. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket, and stepped outside. The sky had darkened again. Not with rain, but with something heavier. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the shelter halls, passing the others who had long since surrendered to their dreams. I envied them, their simple exhaustion. I was wide awake with purpose, and it terrified me. Elias found me in the hallway. You got an answer, he said quietly. Yes, I whispered. She can help. But it means seeing them again. He nodded slowly. Your children. Children, I repeated, almost bitterly. They were once. Now they're architects of something Elise warned me about. Power without conscience. He didn't speak for a while. Then softly, so what will you do? I looked toward the window. The city lights shimmered through the glass, fractured and distant. What she asked me to, I said. Remember who I was. For days I planned. Not vengeance, clarity. I gathered what I had. The documents, Elise's letter, Mira's findings. I mapped everything, like I used to when designing mergers. Each move, each counter. My hands remembered the rhythm of structure, even if my heart trembled at the cost. Finally, I wrote back to Mira. Proceed. The next phase moved quickly. Mira had connections, journalists, investigators, a quiet network of those who still believed in truth without spectacle. Within a month, she'd built a case strong enough to challenge the false ownership structures. When the papers were filed, my children received the news before I did. And then, one by one, they began reaching out. First, my eldest, Daniel. His message was short, "Why now?" Then Claire, "You're going to destroy everything we built." And finally, the youngest, Julian, whose voice I hadn't heard since the day he walked away. His message wasn't written. He called. "Father," he said quietly, the word foreign on his tongue. "Is this you?" "Yes. You're alive. Very much so." He paused as if weighing something invisible. "You could have just asked. We could have helped you." "Helped me?" I said, my voice low. "You buried me." Silence. Then, "You don't understand." "I understand enough," I said. "And soon the world will too." He exhaled, sharp and angry. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said. "But it's mine to make." When the line went dead, I felt no victory, only the deep ache of inevitability. The return wasn't about reclaiming power. It was about facing the ghosts of what love had become. That night, I stood beneath the city lights and whispered Elisa's words again. "Be patient now. The truth will come home when it's ready." The truth was home, and it was no longer welcome in silence. The summons arrived on a grey morning, wrapped in formality and dust. My name, my full name, was printed in bold on the front, the way it used to appear on magazine covers and shareholder letters. Seeing it again felt strange, like reading the epitaph of a man who hadn't truly died. The hearing was set for the following week. A financial tribunal, discreet, shielded from press, to address unresolved inheritance anomalies. That was their phrasing. In truth, it was the reckoning I'd been walking towards since the day they left me at the shelter. For the first time in years, I put on a suit. It didn't fit the way it used to. My shoulders had narrowed, and the fabric hung loose at the collar. The man in the mirror wasn't the one who built companies or gave keynote speeches. He was the one who learned to sleep on creaking cots and wake to the sound of rain on metal roofs. Still, as I straightened the cuffs, I whispered to the reflection, "You're not here for revenge. You're here for truth." When I arrived at the building, my children were already there. They stood together in the marble foyer, a perfect picture of composure and wealth. Daniel, tall, silver hair at the temples. His mother's eyes, but none of her warmth. Claire, sharp, immaculate, her arms crossed like a shield. Julian, younger, restless, the only one who couldn't quite meet my gaze. The moment I stepped through the doors, silence rippled through the room. Daniel's jaw clenched first. "You look different," he said, the words clipped, careful. "I am different," I replied. "But so are you, I imagine." Claire's voice cut in, smooth and cold. "Why are you doing this, father?" "We've moved on. You should too." "Moved on?" I said, the echo of her tone sharp against the marble. "You mean moved up, on the bones of what I built?" Her face didn't flinch, but her hands tightened slightly at her sides. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You wanted the power without the past. You wanted to forget the man who made it all possible." Julian finally spoke softly. "It wasn't like that. We thought you were gone. The doctors said you weren't coming back. We were trying to protect what was left," I asked, "or erase what was inconvenient." He looked down. I could see the guilt simmering beneath his composure. It was the first honest thing in that entire room. Inside the chamber, the air felt heavier, scented faintly of paper, ink, and cold ambition. Mira was already seated at the back, calm, precise, her presence like a shadow made of reason. She caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. The proceedings began. Lawyers spoke first, polished, detached voices, arguing about assets, trustees, and validity of signatories. They debated my mental capacity during the years following Elise's death, the legality of the documents my children had signed, and the authenticity of the fund structures. It was like watching strangers dissect a life that used to be mine. At one point, Daniel stood, addressing the board with that same charisma that used to draw investors to my company. "My father wasn't capable of managing his affairs," he said, gesturing to me without looking directly. "We acted in his best interest, as any responsible heirs would. His best interest." The words stung worse than any insult. When my turn came, I rose slowly, every movement deliberate. The microphone crackled as I spoke. I was many things in my life: a builder, a husband, a father. I believed in legacy, but legacy, I said, glancing at them, isn't measured in what you pass down. It's measured in what you protect. I unfolded Elisa's letter. The courtroom fell silent. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. This, I said, holding it up, was written by your mother before she died. She warned me about what ambition does when love becomes currency. She feared this, not the loss of wealth, but the loss of conscience. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Julian's eyes glistened. Daniel's face remained stone. I laid the letter down before the board. You ask if I was of sound mind, I continued. I was grieving, but grief doesn't erase truth. They changed documents, redirected funds, and built empires on false signatures. I don't want it back. I just want acknowledgement that I was here, that I was never the ghost they made me out to be. The words hung in the air, raw and electric. Even the lawyers seemed unsure what to say. The chairman leaned forward. Mr. Veron, what outcome are you seeking? I looked at my children. The truth. Nothing more. The rest of the session blurred. Legal jargon filled the room, but I barely heard it. My focus was on them. On the flicker of guilt that crossed Julian's face. The slight tremor in Claire's hand. The unreadable coldness in Daniel's eyes. For the first time they looked small to me. Not in stature, but in spirit. When the hearing adjourned, none of them approached me. I walked out alone, the rain having started again, thin and relentless. Outside, Mira joined me beneath the awning. You spoke well, she said. They heard you, did they? I asked quietly. She nodded toward the doors where Julian lingered, half hidden in shadow, watching me. Maybe one of them did. I looked back once, meeting his gaze across the rain. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. But the way his shoulders sank, it was enough. As Mira and I walked away, she asked, What will you do if the tribunal rules in your favor? I don't want their money, I said. Just their silence to end, she smiled faintly. And if it doesn't? Then I'll tell my story, every word of it. That night, I returned to the shelter. Elias was waiting at the door, as if he'd known. You went, he said. I did. And? I looked past him toward the dim hall, the place that had given me back my name when I had none. I think I'm starting to come home, I said. He nodded. Sometimes coming home isn't about going back. It's about finally standing where you belong. I slept for the first time in years without waking from ghosts. The rain tapped against the window like quiet applause. Somewhere in the city, my children were realizing that power could no longer protect them from truth. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more thing I had to do. The verdict arrived on a morning so still it felt staged. The kind of silence that presses down on the world just before something breaks. I sat in the shelter's small office, the letter unopened before me, its seal a clean red scar across the envelope. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had changed. Buses sighed against the curb, rainwater trickled through gutters, and Elias was somewhere in the kitchen humming that off-key hymn he always did when he didn't want to ask questions. I turned the envelope over once, twice, then I opened it. The tribunal had ruled in my favor. Not entirely, not in the way people usually mean when they talk about winning, but in the way that mattered. The board acknowledged the fraudulent transfers, the coerced signatures, the ethical breaches. The estate, what was left of it, would be divided anew under independent oversight. My name, legally, publicly, was restored as the rightful founder and trustee. They couldn't give me back the years, or a lease, or the life I had before, but they gave me back the truth. When I looked up, the world outside the window seemed sharper, as though every color had been washed clean. I hadn't realized how heavy silence could be until it finally lifted. Later that day, a message came through from Julian. No lawyers, no signatures, just words, Father, I saw the ruling. I don't know what to say. I was angry for a long time, but now, I think I understand why you did it. You deserve to be heard. I'm sorry for what we became. It was short, but it was enough. The kind of message that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some words need to rest before they can breathe. That evening, I walked through the city again. Not as a ghost this time, but as a man learning how to exist without armor. The light shimmered across wet pavement, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Lined face, steady eyes. A stranger, and yet not. I ended up at the cemetery, standing before Elisa's grave. The air was cold, carrying that faint, earthy sweetness that only comes after rain. I brushed the leaves from her headstone and laid the envelope, the tribunal's ruling, beside it. You were right, I whispered. About everything. For a long time I said nothing else. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the sounds of the city far away. Car horns, laughter, life. I thought about the day she left me that letter, how she'd written that truth has its own clock, that it always finds a way home. It had taken years, but it had come. As I turned to leave, I saw movement at the far end of the path. Julian, standing just beyond the gates. He looked hesitant, drenched from the rain. When our eyes met, he started walking toward me, slowly, like a man approaching something fragile. "Father," he said when he reached me, his voice low, uneven. "Julian." He swallowed hard. "I wanted to come sooner. I didn't know if you'd want to see me." "I wasn't sure either," I said. He gave a faint, tired smile. "You were right about Daniel and Claire. They won't speak to me now. They think I betrayed them. Did you?" He hesitated. I told the board the truth about the signatures, about the documents. It felt wrong to keep pretending. For the first time in years, I reached out, a small gesture, barely more than a touch on his shoulder. "Then you didn't betray anyone. You just stopped lying," he nodded, his eyes glistening. "What happens now? I don't know," I said honestly. "But for the first time, I think that's a good thing." We stood there a while longer in the fading light, two men bound by blood and consequence, both learning how to live with the ghosts they'd made. When we finally walked away, I didn't look back at Elise's grave. Some farewells don't need words. Weeks passed. The story spread, quiet but unstoppable. Boardroom whispers, shareholder murmurs, the faint rustle of names returning to their rightful places. I never sought the spotlight again. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken loud enough. The shelter remained my home for a while longer. I helped Elias with repairs, worked with new arrivals, told them that sometimes the hardest part of starting over isn't the loss. It's learning that survival isn't the same as living. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window and began to write. Not a speech or a statement, just a story. My story, the one you've just heard. I wrote it not for revenge, but for remembrance, because stories, like people, need to be seen before they can rest. If this story ever makes you think twice about trust, forgiveness, or the silence between them, share it. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too. My name is Corin Veron, and this, finally, is my piece.